Greetings to all you who are watching this video. For those that don't know me, I am Kevin Miller with Christ Forgiveness Ministry here in Memphis. And today I am talking about October 31st. What is today? Halloween. So, how many people are excited and ready to go out and celebrate Halloween? Well, I have news for you. If you are celebrating that day, God is not pleased with it, and He is not pleased with anyone who is celebrating that day. Why is that? Because it is not a holiday for the Lord, it is a holiday for Satan. So if you are celebrating that day and you're saying that, well, there's nothing wrong with Halloween, and Halloween is a good thing. It's a way to fellowship with other people, to have fun, to have parties, to spend time with family and friends, to go out and trick or treat and so forth. Those things are not of God, although it has something that can be seemingly like it is a good thing because it is a way to do those things. But when you really look at it closely and you really look at the root of things, then you see that it is not something that God is pleased with. In order to know the truth about something, in order to know the truth about a religion or a holiday, you have to go back to the origin. You have to go back to the root of where it came from and what it's all about. So I'm going to speak about some things, and so that you don't take my word for it, you can look it up also for yourself to see if what I'm telling you is the truth. But before I even say that, I just want to touch on some things when it comes down to this day, Halloween, that you have a lot of people that have very bad intentions, and they would use this day to do wickedness in the eyes of not only God, but to people. And so what they would do is they would go and commit heinous acts of violence. They would cause people to be poisoned by putting poison in the candies. Now we see fentanyl in disguised as candy, and Nerds and Skittles and colorful candy. So even so, those who have already purchased those things, and you're watching this video, be skeptical of these things because they found them in stores, and they saw that the dangers of fentanyl, that just somebody can just really just consume it, just a fraction of it, and it'll cause issues to happen abruptly right away. In many cases, death. And in other cases, it's so strong that when some people just touch it, because it goes into the pores of the skin, or somehow it causes a person to get really sick, or in again some cases die. So you have to look at the dangers of what this day is actually opening up, for when it comes down to coming against the people, the human race. You got so many people that mean harm to other people. You got violence constantly increasing. This is a day that you're going to see a lot of violence. When you look it up, you look across our country, you see a lot of people, although celebrating this day, they see that there's a lot of violence that come out as a result of this. You got, even in other countries, there was just, in South Korea just a couple of days ago, there was a group of people, about 100 and something people, got stampeded celebrating in Seoul's Korea, South Korea, celebrating, looking forward to Halloween and All Souls Days or whatever. They were not prepared to die when they went out to celebrate such a day. That's supposed to be a day of celebration, but not knowing that there were going to be some consequences behind celebrating such a day. So we have to look at that these things are not intended for us to be celebrating. It was not intended for us to be taking part of it, especially if you're calling yourself a Christian. If you're calling yourself a Christian and you're celebrating this wicked day, then you have to understand that God is not happy with those that practice it, because you're going after other things and you're celebrating things that have no fellowship with the Lord. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that, not only is it, somebody getting hurt, assaulted, but they're dressing up in these masks and they are not being able to be identified because of it. It's a day that they can get away with it, dressing up as a scary person or whatever, and they can commit a heinous act of violence, and it could be on camera, and nobody know who that person is. But then you have people getting raped, children getting abducted, just because an adult is with the person don't mean that that person or those people are going to be safe. So you had even people driving and running people over. Just so many things that's happening. Needles being put in certain candies and so forth, and a child bite into it and it pierces them. And a lot of times those needles can be affected with AIDS or some other type of disease. So we have to look at who are we benefiting, and what is the purpose of this day. It is not to glorify God. It is not to have any relationship with God, but it is all about glorifying Satan and having a relationship with him and his demonic spirits. So this is something that I found on the History Channel, and it talks about Halloween, certain things that it speaks of. Of course, we know that Halloween is on October 31st. And this is what it says. The traditions originated with the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, when people would light bonfires and wear costumes to ward off ghosts. In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III designated November 1st as a time to honor All Saints Day, and incorporated some of the traditions of Samhain. The evening before was known as All Hallows Eve and later Halloween. Over time, Halloween evolved into a day of activities like trick-or-treating, carving jack-o'-lanterns, festival gatherings, donning customs, and eating treats. Ancient original Halloween dates back to the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, pronounced Samhain. The Celts, who lived 2,000 years ago, mostly in the area that is now Ireland, the UK or United Kingdoms, and northern France, celebrated their new year on November 1st. This day marked the end of summer and harvest, and began the dark, cold winter, which was a time of year that was often associated with human deaths. Celts believe that on the night before the new year, the boundaries between the worlds of the living and the dead became blurred. On the night of October 31st, they celebrated Samhain. It was believed that the ghosts of the dead returned to earth. Now, this is something that they believed and was afraid of. They were so afraid that they would dress up in these type of costumes, these type of outfits that would be disguised like demonic spirits or spirits, anything from the spirit realm, so they would not recognize them. In addition to causing trouble in damaging crops, Celts thought that the presence of the other world spirits made it easier for the Druids or Celtic priests to make predictions about the future. For a people entirely dependent on the volatile natural world, these prophecies were an important source of comfort during the long dark winter. So this was something that the when you're seeing, you know, these people who were dealing with prophecies, you know, they can easily call themselves prophets or whatever, but these were people that was dealing in witchcraft or in divination. These you know, people that believed it, like psychics, you know, they did things, you know, predicting futures and so forth. But, you know, I'm going to continue to read because it's probably going to bring it up. Let's see. To commemorate the event, Druids built huge sacred bonfires where the people gathered to burn crops and animals as sacrifices to Celtic deities. During the celebration, the Celts wore costumes typically consisting of animal heads and skins and attempted to tell each other's fortune. When the celebration was over, they relit their hearth fires, which they had extinguished earlier that evening, from the sacred bonfire to help protect them during the coming winter. So you had, again, they typically were dressed up in these costumes, but they would have these animal, dress up with these animal type of costumes, even animal skins, and they would put it on them. And this was a ritual, bobbing of apples even. It dated back in 43 AD. And the Roman Empire had conquered the majority of Celtic's territory during that time. In the course of 400 years that they ruled the Celtic land, two festivals of Roman origin were combined with the traditional Celtic celebration of Samhain. The first was Feralia, a day in late October when the Romans traditionally commemorated the passing of the dead. The second was a day to honor Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruit and trees. The symbol of Pomona is the apple, and the incorporation of this celebration into Samhain probably explained the tradition of bobbing for apples that is practiced today on Halloween. Now, this I also got from another site, which was several documentaries was on, as well as some videos out there that speaks of the history, the origin of bobbing of apples. And it says supposedly the Jews of the British Islands would force villagers to bob for apples from huge cauldrons. Now, a cauldron, for those that don't know, it's like a big melting pot, a big pot, and you could put boiling water in it. In this case, bobbing for apples back then, they put apple cider in there. And they would boil that apple cider, and they would put the apples in the cauldron. And now, in today's time, people, you know, bob for apples in cold water, and you put the apples in the cold water, it just floats to the top. And the children, they have the children or the adults would bob for the apple and try to pull the apple out with their mouth without using their hands. And back then, this was going on in a hot cauldron filled with apple cider or with with apple cider, and they would boil it. And what would happen is when those apples begin to boil, they would the juices from the apple cider would absorb into the apples, and the apples would begin to sink. Now imagine, if you will, these people trying to bob for these apples. And why would they? According to this, it says, and get their faces scalded or be decapitated and thrown into a burning wicker man if they refuse. So imagine back then, and several resources would show that if they were to bob for these apples, these people had swords and they were ready to chop their heads off if they came up without an apple in their mouth. And so if they went down there and they actually tried to bob for the apple and they got burnt and they came up quickly, then without the apple, then they would get either the head cut off or they would get a limb cut off, maybe a finger, maybe a hand, maybe an arm, maybe some portion of their body cut off, and then as an incentive for them to go ahead and try to bob for the apple again. Now, in some cases, they would not kill them instantly. They would not chop their head off, but they may cut off limbs, or if somebody refused to do it, also, they would go to the wicker man. And what is the wicker man? The wicker man is this tall, and you could Google search it, you could look it up and see, maybe YouTube it and see what it says on that, what it shows, what a wicker man would look like. It's basically a tall man shaped figure made of tree limbs, and they would cut these things, thick pieces of tree limbs, and they would make it strong enough that it makes steps up into the torso part of the tree and of the tree man, and they would put in it cages made of wood for people to go inside and later be burned as sacrifices. So some of these people were sacrifices also from people that would go into the villages in order to escape from these spirits that would come and do harm for them to them. They would sacrifice a family member or a servant, anybody that was in their household, and this was somebody that was mostly randomly picked, and a certain family, or families. In some cases, it was like several people in the village who would become a sacrifice on that day. So this is something that was wicked, not seen as good, and this is something that they feared. They feared these spirits in between these worlds, these two worlds, from the physical world to the spiritual world. All Saints Day on May 13, AD 609, Pope Boniface IV dedicated the Pantheon in Rome in honor of all Christian martyrs. And the Catholic feast of All Martyrs' Day was established in the Western Church. Pope Gregory III later expanded the festival to include all saints as well as all martyrs, and moved the observance from May 13 to November 1st. By the 19th century, the influence of Christianity had spread into Celtic lands, where it gradually blended with and supplanted older Celtic rites. In AD 1000, the Church made November 2nd, All Souls Day, a day to honor the dead. Now, why are we celebrating something to honor the dead? The dead is it's only two places where the dead is going to go when they die. It's either they're going to, because it says to be absent from the body is to be present to the Lord. So, in other words, the Holy Bible, the book of truth, it says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So that means that the Lord is going to instantly judge those people to eternal life or to eternal death. Maybe not instantly, but he already determined, because of the way they left their life, because there's also ultimate going to be a judgment day where all nations of the world are going to be judged. That is the living and the dead. Because ultimately we all are going to be put on eternal bodies, and ultimately what we did in the present life, how we're living our life right now, is going to be a choice while we're living, to make that choice of where we want to spend our eternity. Either we want to spend it with the Lord, or we want to spend it in hell. So that is our choice while we're still living. Once it's over, once we die, this body, this temporary body, has become no more, then we're going to put on a different body, a eternal body of life or an eternal body of death. So that is up to us on which one we're going to choose. But so it's a festival of the dead in which they were basically celebrating. And All Souls Day was celebrated similarly to Samhain, with big bonfires, parades, and dressing up in costumes, and as saints, angels, devils. So, you could be justifying and saying, well, that was back then. So Halloween today is not really celebrated for evil, but it's good. Some people, yes, they dress up like monsters and demons and whatever, devils, but I dress my children up and myself as angels, as a superhero, as something good, as a ballerina, whatever it is, and they think that is pleasing to God when they do it. That's a justification to do evil on a wicked day that celebrates Satan and demonic spirits. So it goes on, and it talks about the All Saints Day celebrated was also called All Hallows or All Hallow Mass, and Hallow Mass, meaning All Saints Day, and the night before it, the traditional night of Samhain and the Celtic religion, began to be called All Hallows Eve and eventually Halloween. So hence what we have today that is celebrated throughout the world. Halloween comes to America. The celebration was extremely limited to colonial New England because of the rigid Protestant belief system there. Halloween was much more common in Maryland and the southern colonies, as the belief and customs of different European ethnic groups and the American Indian mashed a distinctly American version of Halloween began to emerge. The first celebration included play parties, which were public event held to celebrate the harvest. Neighborhoods would share stories of the dead, tell each other's fortune, dance, and sing. Colonial Halloween festivities also featured the telling of ghost stories and mischief making of all kinds. By the middle of the 19th century, annual autumn festivals or festivities were common. But Halloween was not yet celebrated everywhere in the country. In the second half of the 19th century, America was flooded with new immigrants. These new immigrants, especially the millions of Irish fleeing the Irish potato famine, helped to popularize the celebration of Halloween nationally. So, I remember that, thinking of bonfires as a child when I was young, uh, maybe, I don't know, somewhere around 10 or so years old, maybe a little bit early, maybe a little bit older. And we would sit around a bonfire, campfire, whatever, and we would actually tell stories, try and tell the most scariest story to our friends or whoever was in the group, try and scare them. Or whoever's the adult in there, would tell a scary story and try to frighten us, and it was harmless. It was just harmless fun, that we thought back then, but not really realizing and understanding the repercussions of those things, that through these type of activities, you can have nightmares. Those are windows of opportunity for demons to come into your life. These are doorways in which has opened up so that you can be, tormented. You got some people, they end up opening up other doors to Ouija boards, to witchcraft, to magic, and so forth. A lot of times we go to movies and we watch these type of things, which I'll cover later, and those are windows of opportunity for demonic activity to come in. History of trick-or-treating. Borrowing from European traditions, Americans began to dress up in costumes and began to go house to house asking for food or money, a practice that eventually became today's trick-or-treat tradition. Young women believed that on Halloween they could have a divine name or appearance of their future husband by the doing tricks with yarn, apple paring, or mirrors. So this was something that was once believed that they could, through a psychic or some kind of, something like card readings or whatever, apple paring, through looking at a mirror, through mirrors or whatever, that they would be able to divinely find out who their husband was. This is demonic, as it's not of God. In the late 1800s, there was a move in America to mold Halloween into holidays, or to a holiday like it is today, more about communities and neighborhood get-togethers than about ghost pranks and witchcraft, which was what it started off as well. At the turn of the century, Halloween parties for both children and adults became the most common way to celebrate the day. Parties focused on games, foods of the seasons, and festive costumes. Parents were encouraged by newspapers and community leaders to take anything frightening or grotesque out of Halloween celebrations. Because of these efforts, Halloween lost most of its superstitious and religious overtones by the beginning of the 20th century. So here was a group of leaders decided to get together and try to make what is an evil tradition, had evil origins, and they try to make it pleasing. Why? Because it was a trap by Satan to fool God's people, Christians, to believe a lie, to fall into a trap that can cause them to lose their salvation. And we'll cover that in a little while. Halloween parties by the 1920s and 30s, Halloween had become a secular but community centered holiday, with parades and town wide Halloween parties as a future entertainment. Despite the best efforts of many schools and communities, vandalism began to plague some celebrations in many communities during this time. By the 1950s, town leaders had successfully limited vandalism, and Halloween had evolved into a holiday directed mainly at the young. Due to the high number of young children during the 50s baby boom, parties moved from town civic centers into classrooms or homes where they could be more easily accommodated. Between 1920 and 1950, the century old practice of trick or treating was also revived. Trick or treating was a relatively inexpensive way for an entire community to share the Halloween celebration. In theory, families could also prevent tricks being played on them by providing the neighborhood children with small treats. Thus, a new American tradition was born, and it has continued to grow. Today, America spends an estimate $6 billion annually on Halloween, making it the country's second largest commercial holiday after Christmas. So here is something that started off from evil doing, and then they tried to justify by making it something pleasurable, something good, something that families can be a part of and could celebrate. They can prevent vandalism by having the most giving the most trick-or-treating and being the house that gives the most trick-or-treating gifts. I remember when I was growing up, when I used to be a part of that practice as a child, we used to know, because we trick-or-treated every year, which houses gave the better treats. So that was something that, we look forward to, just like Christmas. We look forward to getting that candy. And back then, when I was growing up, it wasn't, you didn't have the candy being poisoned, at least not that I was hearing of. And it wasn't until I got into my 20s that I started hearing such things, and needles and so forth, that was happening, and the parents had to be more cautious. This was probably around the 80s and 90s, maybe the 90s, something like that. And so you had these things being justified on why it is good, though, to practice this holiday. Halloween movies, like scary movies like Halloween, you had sequels to Halloween. You had Nightmare on Elm Street, sequels to that with Freddy Krueger. You had other movies like Jason, again, sequels to those movies. And that's just to name a few. There were so many more scary movies, you can't even count them all. It's thousands of scary movies out there. And demonic, if you look at what is a scary movie is a demonic movie in which, unfortunately, Christians are just as guilty as many of the people who don't know God. They go out and they be a part of these pleasures, and they go out with their friends, family, loved ones, whoever it is, and they want to be scared. Now, imagine, if you will, if that was really a part of their life. If you're watching this and you're partaking in this, imagine if that was really a part of your life and you had to deal with what you watch in those scary movies. Would you want to be dealing with that? Would that be something that you would be excited for, to be a part of, to be able to really enjoy? No, you wouldn't. You'll be frightened, and you'll be fearful for your life, and you know that you can die at any moment, if you were a part of that in which you're embracing. But that is nothing to do with God. That has no relationship, no fellowship with the Lord. So let me continue. And they would even take certain movies and they would try to make it fun. Fun, scary movie, and make it fun scary movie. Casper the Friendly Ghost or whatever. They had Beetlejuice. I remember watching Beetlejuice and movies like Beetlejuice. They had the Nightmare Before Christmas, stuff like that. It's the Great Pumpkin with Charlie Brown. So and this is, we look at it and say, oh, it's just innocent. It's okay. It's all right. But yet we wonder, why is it that we get nightmares, or we get these we draw attractions to evil things happening into our lives, into our families' lives, and so forth. What is these negative things that are drawing to us? And it's because we experience, or why sickness and disease is in your body, or in a loved one's body. Now, not all the time, I'm not going to say all the time that sickness and disease has to do with something that you may have done. It could be something passed down from generation because of a generational curse. And if that is what you're dealing with and you're a Christian, you have to repent, and you have to break that curse. You have to offer that generation curse off you and your family. Okay, God can do it. I know for a fact God can do it because he did it for me and my family. All Souls Day and soul cakes. The American Halloween tradition of trick-or-treating probably dated back to the early All Souls Day parades in England. During the festivities, poor citizens would beg for food and families would give them pastries called soul cakes in return for their promise to pray for the family's dead relatives. The distribution of soul cakes was encouraged by the church as a way to replace the ancient practice of leaving food and wine for roaming spirits. Now, imagine this is something that was given to people originally, because of these roaming spirits. These spirits were roaming around, and and so people would fear or whatever. And so this was a tradition. The soul cakes took place as a tradition to replace that. The practice, which was referred to as going a-souling, was eventually taken up by children who would visit the houses in their neighborhood and be given food, and money. The tradition of dressing in costumes for Halloween was both European and Celtic roots. Hundreds of years ago, winter was an uncertain and frightening time. Food supplies often ran low, and for many people afraid of the dark, the short days of winter were full of constant worry. On Halloween, when it was believed that ghosts came back to the earthly world, people thought that they would encounter ghosts if they left their homes. To avoid being recognized by these ghosts, people would wear masks when they left their homes after dark, so that the ghosts would mistaken them for fellow spirits. On Halloween, to keep ghosts away from their houses, people would place bowls of food outside their homes to appease the ghosts